So much has been made of Elon's 20-something-year-olds coming in and upending the federal government. But who would you say is his core political team, if he even has one in the traditional sense? Because, most people come into Washington, they have three or four advisors, they have like a chief of staff, they have Republican operatives who know how Washington works. And he had something like that during the campaign trail when he ran America PAC. But is that still the case now? And how do you see, Musk land?
One of the most powerful people in Washington is someone who nobody has really heard of, and his name is Steve Davis. Steve Davis is sort of Elon's fixer, trusted lieutenant, kind of spanning, all of kind of Elon's companies over the years. And he sort of focuses on whatever Elon's obsession happens to be. And right now, Steve Davis is effectively the head of Doge, basically is by Elon's side every minute of every day as he kind of runs around Washington wreaking havoc.
I'm joined today by Teddy Schleifer of the New York Times. Teddy has covered the billionaires of Silicon Valley for years and has developed a particular beat in covering Elon Musk, and he has chronicled the evolution on the campaign trail to basically becoming one of Trump's biggest supporters. And now as he smashes his way through the federal government. So Teddy, thanks for coming on.
Sure thing.
So much has been made of Elon's 20-something-year-olds coming in and upending the federal government. But who would you say is his core political team, if he even has one in the traditional sense? Because, most people come into Washington, they have, three or four advisors, they have like a chief of staff, they have, Republican operatives who know how Washington works. And he had something like that during the campaign trail when he ran America PAC. But is that still the case now? And how do you see, Musk land as it currently stands?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most powerful people in Washington is someone who nobody has really heard of, and his name is Steve Davis. Steve Davis is sort of Elon's fixer, trusted lieutenant, kind of spanning, all of kind of Elon's companies over the years, and he sort of focuses on whatever Elon's obsession happens to be. And right now, Steve Davis is effectively the head of Doge, and he basically is by Elon's side every minute of every day as he kind of runs around Washington wreaking havoc. The one thing I found interesting, Hugo, about Davis right now is even though he's effectively the head of Doge, his role has never been announced. And as part of the executive order that Doge was established under, they said there was going to be this administrator. And White House officials have not said who the administrator is. You would assume it is Elon Musk himself, maybe. Or other people think it could be Steve Davis. So he's very involved. You mentioned, his political advisors, Chris Young, who is sort of the main guy who ran Elon's super PAC toward the end of the campaign, has been seen in Washington, playing a role, I think somewhat recently in some of the Elon efforts. He was at the CFPB last week. And then, they're kind of just random people from Elon's personal life who have been involved in Doge. We reported in a story over the weekend that at the education department, and I'm just using that because it's one agency of many, there are 16 different Doge people who have Elon, who have email addresses at Doge. And that includes, Elon's longtime personal assistant, Jen Valadagia. It includes people that don't really know Elon Musk that well. I think, sometimes we think that, people like Musk are just surrounding himself with kind of loyalists, but a lot of these people who have gotten involved, they're like former SpaceX or Neuralink interns. These are not executives who Elon knows personally. So that's sort of his orbit right now.
And in what capacity are they serving? Because Elon himself is a special government employee, which, as the White House has interpreted the statute, allows him to be an unpaid kind of advisor to the government. He's allowed to keep his external interests and his businesses, and he can continue with his income, and he's not being paid by the government. So they say it's not a conflict of interest there.
Yeah.
Are the rest of his team also special government employees? I mean, they certainly have, from what I understand from my reporting, gold badges that give them access to the Eisenhower Executive Office Building. They have they have offices there, which would seem to indicate they are part of the federal government's workforce, or they're federal government employees. But what is your reporting telling?
Yeah, my understanding is that most of these people are not special government employees, and that for kind of the senior level people who might be willing to work only 130 days a year, which is what this requires, They are, people like Elon Musk. We'll see how that's enforced, but he's a special government employee. But for someone like, these people who've been made famous, like Luke Farritor, who's, kind of one of the young aides who is now sort of a central character and everything happening. Like, these people are full-time employees. And, full-time for now. I mean, we forget that this thing is supposed to be done by July 2026, which is, not that far out. And then they can go back to other jobs. This plays a role, though, Hugo, on the point about some of the debates about security clearances and sort of whether or not these people have full rights to have all the access they have. And obviously, that's a complicated world, which, could be impacted depending on what exactly your government classification is.
And so some of those coders and those engineers that you just mentioned, people like Luke Farritor, they are part of kind of a separate sort of orbit around Elon. And is that a fair characterization? Because you've got the people like Steve Davis, you've got these political guys, but then you have this cadre of young 20-something-year-old engineers. And clearly some of them have burrowed into some of these agencies, but as far as you see it, is there like a core team of engineers that Elon has, I don't know, pride of place or first among equals sort of status, or how does that work?
We've counted about 40 people who are working with Doge and who we think are part of this, or who we've confirmed are part of this, I should say. There are other people who are sort of in like Doge-aligned roles, like, for instance, the new head of the GSA, who is not like he's not a Doge engineer, but is aligned obviously with the goals of the agency. A lot of the people who've gotten involved, again, some of these people are now famous. I'm only somewhat joking, but it was interesting to me that, when we reported when Elon met with JD Vance last week in the EEOB, he brought like 12 of these people along with him. I forget the exact number, something like that. And so you can think about those people as the core, I suppose, the first among equals. But a lot of these people who have no government experience, but they can have 10 different jobs at once as they kind of get detailed all over the federal government. So Steve Davis, I think, is the first among equals. Another guy named Brad Smith, who is sort of a senior person within Doge, and he actually does have some government experience. He served in the first Trump term. He's probably also considered in leadership, but a lot of the worker bees are sort of just kind of plugging away and just talking to JD Vance,
And I think a lot of people listening to this podcast and people who are not in Washington or haven't really tracked what Elon Musk has been doing, one of their central questions is like, what is Elon's motivation? Like, what is his obsession this time with cutting millions or trillions of dollars from the federal budget and spending and shutting down agencies like USAID?
Yeah, I mean, I think Elon is tweeting what his motivations are. I mean, I think he's pretty genuinely believing that this is the solution to fixing all of America. I mean, I think he is very driven by, this is not a hot take, but he's very driven by the tweets he sees himself. He, has an algorithm which shows him kind of right-wing content, and he has increasingly surrounded himself with people who are very, very conservative, who, kind of feed him these things. And, he does not always verify those things, but he acts on those things. I think obviously the conflicts of interest are what they are. I don't believe that he is driven by a desire, at least narrowly, to act on those conflicts. I think those conflicts are totally fair to be scrutinized, but I don't get the impression that he's done this because he wants to, free Tesla from an SEC investigation or anything like that. I think he's to some extent just like anyone else who sort of is, trafficking in sort of the information and ecosystem that lots of people are. They just don't happen to have this vast amount of power.
And what was the rationale then for, because, you've been reporting on this for weeks now, to go into the US Digital Service and take that over and turn it into Doge, as opposed to whatever its initial iteration was going to be part of the Office of Management and Budget, and it was going to be some sort of advisory role sort of thing.
Yeah, we're still kind of learning all that now. I mean, essentially, and we mentioned this in the story in honestly, early mid-January, that it was going to be part of USDS, or they were talking to people about making it part of USDS. I think a lot of this had to do with the ability to frankly do what they're doing right now, where you sort of have, these people who are detailed all over and have the ability to, with an empowered executive and, maybe a disregard for what is legal and what is not, go ahead and kind of vacuum up data and vacuum up systems and, halt payments, which was a part of the whole standoff at Treasury. If you're just looking narrowly at kind of what gives Elon the most power, taking an existing government agency which had the ability to be detailed all over and, kind of jujitsuing it into this other role where you can, have vast government, the ability to take action, was smart. And Elon clearly figured something out.
So, in between all of the successes that Doge keeps claiming it has, and cutting all these programs, they've also been hitting a bunch of roadblocks, especially in recent days when it comes to the judicial system, including with Judge Engelmeyer in New York, who issued an order that restrained the Treasury Secretary from granting access to external actors to the Treasury Department's systems. And over the weekend, we kind of had this extraordinary situation play out when a series of tweets, and it was also backed up by the vice president, Elon was effectively promoting a viewpoint about, well, what if we just ignored the courts and we just ignored these judicial orders because they're kind of getting in the way of what we need to do, and kind of these very strained and frankly nonsense arguments about how co-equal branches of government work. So, I mean, where is the line, do we think, at this point for Elon? And, he's never experienced pushback like this when he was running SpaceX or PayPal or X or any of his other companies. He's now butting against, federal judicial authority. Do you anticipate Elon as having the, I don't know, drive is the right word, but to barrel through that as well?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean, to some extent, we've no idea. It really depends in part on what Trump is comfortable with Elon doing. The fact that Vance has been saying this, it seems like they're clearly laying the predicate for them to do exactly what you just described and just not care and just drive right through it. I wonder, Trump is obviously always someone who wants an empowered executive, and, the court system has been stacked with lots of Trump loyalists. But you're getting at a tension, which I think is pretty interesting to me, at least intellectually, is Elon has been able to get away with a lot in the courts. And, I still think about all the cases he's won that suggest these are not really guardrails, at least on Elon as a private sector individual. And I think one of the big questions of Elon's entire work here is will this time be different because it's in the public sector? There are Elon has had lots of success in the private sector, but there are unique things about, doing this, especially with, the legal system, and this invincibility that Elon has sort of brought to all his kind of corporate work. Does that hold up when you are trying to do this in the public sector? And, Elon would say the public sector should be more like the private sector, yada, yada, yada. But I'm curious whether or not there are additional guardrails that kind of keep him restrained, maybe unfairly in his view, that have not restrained him to date.
I mean, what was extraordinary, or part of what was extraordinary to me over the weekend, was when Elon started criticizing the orders, including in Washington. One of the restraining orders in a separate case was handed down by Judge Carl Nichols, who is a Trump-appointed federal district judge who, and people, I guess, if you're not tracking it, don't realize this, but he was the judge that laid the groundwork for Trump to be able to go to the Supreme Court and get out of and get his Supreme Court immunity case in his criminal prosecutions. And when Elon criticized Nichols, it set off this chain reaction that ultimately culminated in Mike Davis, who is one of these Trump legal advisors, saying, Nichols has to go. Like, Nichols, this super conservative judge who clerked for Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, among other people, he was a product of big law, and now you're standing in the way of the president, and he had to go. And I wonder if kind of Elon is already remaking how Washington sees kind of even really conservative judges on the federal bench. It's quite an interesting concept that I was grappling with Sunday night, and to your point, I think we have to see how it goes. But it was just
and don't forget that Elon Musk still has a massive super PAC that he could turn on anytime to he can't do this to federal judges, but is he going to start trying to elect judges who might agree with him in state courts and stuff like that? We got a lot of the show left to go.
And so finally, then what's next on the agenda at Doge? I know you talk to these guys and you track it pretty closely. There
Yeah.
was this discussion about going into the Pentagon. Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, said he was looking forward to working with Musk. Do you get the sense that Musk has a roadmap of which agencies he wants to target in particular order? Is it kind of done on the fly, whatever he thinks is interesting next? I mean, what is the process here?
I mean, I think they're doing every agency. I mean, I'm finding these stories kind of unsatisfying as a reader because it's like, Mad Libs of person X shows up at person Y demanding Z. What I mean? They're doing every agency. They've said publicly they're going to have Doge representatives at every agency. We're sort of learning the identities. I don't know if that tells you that much about them, but we're learning. In which where they're at on any given day. I would expect there to be Doge activity at every single agency eventually. Yeah.
Because one aspect of fascination for me is someone who covers kind of the White House and the Department of Justice, and that's kind of my lane here. It's like
Sure.
DOJ historically has been pretty insulated from everything the White House does. Obviously, we've gone through that guardrail, but there are people now at the FBI, including one person who's been affiliated with, what's been reported to
Justin
be
Monroe,
affiliated.
yeah.
Right, and so is that seen in everyone's psyche as an extent as someone from Doge? Is that seen as like a Musk deputy? I think a lot of people at the FBI are trying to square this.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, is the answer. I mean, I haven't done any individual reporting on that, but clearly, I mean, Justin Monroe, for instance, worked at SpaceX is my recollection. So, I mean, the Doge representatives are not secrets. I mean, at least internally. I mean, they're described as Doge representatives. They often have some Doge designation on their email or their signature. I mean, that's why it's getting out, because they're telling thousands of people what they're doing. So.
No, that makes sense. But we'll continue to watch it and we'll continue to read your reporting because it has been so far ahead of everyone else's. And I was really glad to get you on today. So thank you. It was great to talk to you.
Sure thing. Thanks so much.